Everybody, and welcome to another episode of LP Alliance's podcast. We are here today with Adam J. Cahoon and Rachel Blackfire from the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. They are some of the new candidates running for the slate in New Hampshire. And we're going to spend an hour or so giving them a good grilling here about what they want to do differently than what's currently in place and how they want to further the efforts that are already in place that are successful. So I guess let's start with a good quick intro from Rachel.
My name is Rachel Danner. I've been in the liberty movement for about 10 years. Well, I've identified as a libertarian for about 11 years. I've been actually in the movement for about 8 years. And I've worked for the Libertarian Party of Florida as a region rep, so serving on their executive committee for about 2 to 3 years when I lived in Florida. I've worked on assorted campaigns, worked for various organizations, tabling, door knocking, and petitioning, and I led the ballot access drive for Steve Veeley for governor and Chase Oliver for president in New Hampshire in 2024. I was the volunteer coordinator. So my boss managed the fundraising and the paid petitioners. I managed all the volunteers. And we had to get about 5,000 signatures so that we would have enough, assuming about a 70% validity rate, to have 1,500 in each congressional district. So I've been all over the state and talked to a lot of people of various political beliefs all over the state. And that's about it. I'm running for vice chair of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire.
All right, Rachel, how about you, Adam? Can you give us a good background on yourself?
Greetings, everybody. I'm Adam Cahoon. I am a second year at the University of New Hampshire's Franklin Pierce School of Law. I have been with the Liberty Movement since 2016, when I discovered Gary Johnson, though I like to think I was a libertarian since the age of 4. Because of all the things I could have quoted from the Cat in the Hat movie, the thing that stuck was no more big government. Aside from that, I recently became more politically active while working with the Chase Oliver campaign, both as the formal state director and, on the occasion, wrote a few speeches for him. I am running for secretary. I apologize for not mentioning that.
It's okay.
Fine.
We got it wrong in our tweet anyhow. So we're all good.
Okay.
But you are running for secretary.
Our running mates are Spencer Dias for chair, Steve Veeley for governor, Aria DiMezio for at-large. Steve Veeley for treasurer.
No, Rachel.
Governor.
Now you just did what I did. So. What is going on in LP New Hampshire right now, and what are some things that you're looking to change?
Right now, the party does pretty much nothing except run a bar at PorkFest and run a highly inflammatory Twitter account that constantly posts anti-liberty stuff and extremely hostile messaging that does nothing but hurt any liberty or free state associated movement in the state.
I would actually even argue that it's probably detrimental wider than that. So as I've campaigned with various folks in Georgia, including for some very conservative candidates, there's consistently been people that are like, I voted Libertarian in the past, but I'm not anymore. Anytime that LPNH comes up in conversations with these candidates, it's a pretty negative response. So that's one of the things that I'm kind of interested in hearing about, what you guys really are looking to do with some of that messaging, and which way you would go in the future with it.
Yeah, I definitely would echo that. That is surely more of an effect. I know that Kaufman kind of thinks that it's just a kind of a safeguarding. He thinks of gatekeeping around the party to only have more people that think that way. But it really does have a wider effect than that. I know, if I'm in Philadelphia, right? And so there's definitely a lot more left-leaning people here. When you say the word libertarian here, a lot of them will have only heard that word or really been engaged in it when news media pick up the kind of crazy inflammatory statements that are being made out of that account. Mm-hmm. So it's definitely having much more wide-ranging effects on the ability to even sell the underlying principles to people that might agree on even just, single issue coalitions. So it goes beyond just necessarily recruiting people to the party, but also getting these other liberty goals that you might be able to partner with either conservatives or liberals and say, hey, we want to get these things done, but they don't want to work with you if that's the kind of branding that you've already been kind of associated with. So do you have any
Absolutely.
experience with this as
I
well?
saw that. Sorry if I didn't let you
No, you're
finish.
good.
I saw this firsthand actually when I was working with Rachel during ballot access. Contrary to what Kaufman might say with all of his bluster of a libertarian homeland, during the petitioning, most people did not really stop signing or didn't sign because Chase Oliver was the candidate. Truthfully, most of them didn't know who he was, or if they did, they didn't really care. For the majority of them, what turned them off was the word libertarian itself. And in a state where their 10th article empowers them to have the right to revolution, where the 12th article, the first part of that same constitution, forbids the state government from taxing them without their consent. Find that word that repugnant, there is a serious problem.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's a bit of a brand risk, and it's kind of muddying kind of the waters of what it means to be a libertarian from what it might have historically been. So what, I think there are some criticisms out there that immediately, like, if you're not for this crazy messaging, somehow you must be like a libertarian socialist or something like that. Could you guys describe to me a little bit about like what your version of libertarian might be? Describe kind of maybe what what are your influences in the liberty space and kind of what you see libertarianism meaning?
I'll go first. I've identified as an ANCAP for about 8 years. So that's pretty much as radical right libertarian as you can get. I think that if we want to actually reduce the state, it's going to take a gradual reduction. So I don't identify as a leftist at all. In terms of like just if you want to water left and right down to cultural things, I oppose sort of cancel culture, any speech mandates. So I wouldn't even call myself woke. I just think people should have freedom to do whatever they want with their lives.
What about
Yeah, so
yourself,
you're-
I
Adam?
go a lot of that sentiment, though I'd like to say that I am my own invention in that regard, though if you were really to force me into one of the many sub-libertarian camps, the closest I think I would probably qualify is voluntarism.
And what are you looking to bring to LPNH with your new slate? Obviously, you're saying there's some changes that need to be made. What are some initiatives that you want to see, some reforms that you want to see? What are you thinking about?
So I would like to get us focused on being a principled voice for liberty in the state. I want us to have freedom as our North Star. Right now, the messaging is very anti-freedom. I want us to be actually doing outreach. This is a state that the culture of it is just more inclined to liberty. There's a reason that it was a great place for the FSP to declare this is where you should move to. It already had a very libertarian setup. It's the freest country in the state. The culture here is more libertarian. Even the Democrats like guns and oppose taxation, and the Republicans don't care what you do with your personal life. So even if these people are just here and they're not libertarians already, why shouldn't we be outreaching to them? We might find people that didn't even know they were libertarians. If we are an active party doing outreach, it's more likely that the people that are already here will like us.
And so, it's not like they don't have money, right? All this inflammatory stuff, they might get ad rev from this. Why aren't they utilizing this money to do that? Is it, I may have a feeling that they probably don't want the party to grow because they really do want it to be gate kept around a very small number of people that really like that messaging. But they don't really want to grow this and expand these into other liberty spaces. Because we know, like you said, there are other liberty movements in the other political spheres that are there. And, is it possible that this outreach could be done and that it would really advance liberty, not just for the LP and the LP candidates, but maybe also liberty-leaning Republicans or liberty-leaning Democrats? Is this kind of being negated because this outreach isn't happening currently?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, they'll make the point that, well, all the people that are libertarians should run as Republicans. Well, if they think that's the place that's best for them, go ahead. It's not my job to boss them around, but the Libertarian Party is supposed to run candidates of its own. And I think a strong Libertarian voter base best supports a Democrat or Republican who is inclined to liberty, because if that voter base is active and there, and that Republican or Democrat is actually being consistently libertarian, they'll win the votes. A libertarian candidate doesn't hurt another liberty-minded candidate if that liberty-minded candidate is actually acting libertarian. And I think even if libertarians don't win an election, we can be the thing that holds these other liberty reps accountable. If you are going to just play a game with your party and vote along 100% along the Republican line, then someone should run against you. If you're going to vote 100% along the Democrat line, someone should run against you. And there are a lot of races that we could win as libertarians. There's people on budget committees that are libertarians, and the party does nothing to support them now. I want to support those people getting re-elections. I want to identify more races that we can win.
And especially with a more libertarian base, both Republican and Democratic, as you're saying, what would happen is if you had a liberty-minded candidate, a libertarian candidate who's running, they would naturally push those candidates in order to appeal to the more libertarian-minded R's and D's. They'd push those candidates toward libertarian positions. That all comes with running, not with dropping out and throwing in the towel.
Absolutely. The way I kind of look at the situation is competition is a valid conflict management technique. And frankly, for us, competition is good. I remember when, like sometime in 23, Jeremy Kauffman got kicked out of the leadership for the Free State Project. And he basically asked his people on Twitter what I should do. To me, the solution was incredibly simple. Go start your own Free State Project. What's going to happen if he would have done that would be that he would take note of what the Free State Project has done to bring people here. He would either replicate or fine-tune those tactics, and then he would be competing with them in a way that now the end result is more liberty-minded people now live in New Hampshire. And we can do a heck of a lot more now than we could before. Competition is good.
I agree. I think as long as you can have those competitions being on a kind of a fair playing field, as of right now, it seems like the messaging is almost designed to put real libertarian, people running at a position where they are at a disadvantage just because of how bad kind of the public image is around this. So even if people might agree with the policies, the kind of the crazy collectivist and race baiting kind of narrative that's coming out of that Twitter seems to put everybody at like a big disadvantage, when most libertarians, and I would imagine, almost all Republicans and Democrats are going to look at that and go, this is fucked up. And so I think you're already hurting yourself as those candidates. So you can't really even apply the full pressure that you might be able to do otherwise if you had still hardcore principled libertarian messaging from LPNH, but just remove, whatever percentage of the tweets are these ones that seem to generate kind of the most hysteria in their comment sections.
Yeah, I mean, something that comes to mind right now is Angela McArdle's strategy for the National about like using our base as a bargaining chip for like Republicans or Democrats. And it's like my response to that would be, we actually can do that here with a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. We need to make sure that we have the defense mechanisms to keep their words in bound, but it's not a difficult concept. If we wanted to do that, we could. We don't want to, because in the minds of the people who currently are running things, competition is bad.
And let's talk about some of your competition, actually. So obviously you are not non-contested as a slate. There are others running against you. What separates you from your opponents here?
Well, right now we only know of like two people that are running against us. There's Ben Weir for chair and Patrick Bender for secretary. My thoughts on them is that they seem too closely associated with the current board. Patrick pretty explicitly just wants to keep the messaging the way it is. Ben's statements seem to contradict each other at different points. But he's had a chance to rein Jeremy in before, and it didn't happen. He's been very involved in LPNH in the past, and nothing's been done to rein Jeremy in. So what we have now is a group of people who've been working together for a long time, the past few months, and we're ready to lead. We've got a full slate, and we're all dedicated libertarians. I'm going to talk about the other candidates right now. Spencer Dias is a logistics manager. So he has a lot of experience managing a bunch of different moving parts to make a business run effectively. He's ran a successful election to the Goffstown Budget Committee, where he served a term from 2019 to 2022. And he has got a lot of experience campaigning. And he's our chair candidate. Steve Veale has run for governor, and he has been treasurer of the Free State Project for many years. He's running for treasurer, so he's very familiar with compliance. He's also treasurer of NHLA, which is the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, which is an organization that grades bills and candidates. So he's very well acquainted with what the different regulations are around political committees. And our candidate for at-large, Aria DiMezio, has been a long-time libertarian activist and ran a very interesting campaign for sheriff. She ran as a Republican, actually, and she ran under the slogan, "Fuck the police" for sheriff. And yeah, she caused them to run the Republicans, to run a write-in candidate against her.
That's that's definitely a libertarian mindset for a sheriff position. I like it. It sounds like that you kind of have this grouping of people that all have skills and merit for the jobs that they're going to within this slate. It's not just we need somebody to fill this one. It very much seems like the people that you're putting in the different locations have the skill set. Either somebody's very detail oriented for one job or logistics for another, and it seems like kind of the connections to those projects, and to maybe they've been there for, you said it was a founder of the Free State Project or a longtime member of the Free State Project?
So Steve Veale was a very, very early mover, and he's treasurer of the FSP and of NHLA, which is the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance.
Awesome. Okay, so he's got the experience doing that, and I'm guessing many of those organizations don't have the kind of messaging that we've been seeing coming out of LPNH, but they're also very still successful in the liberty space there. So it's evidence that you can be successful in this liberty space without the sort of messaging. So that's really good to see. Yeah. So I guess it really comes back to now, like, how do you guys guarantee to these people that might be worried that you're still going to be a hardcore messaging and get things done, but still, kind of avoid the pitfalls that we've seen recently? Like what type of messaging do you think will accomplish that? Like how will you, let's say you have to respond to some public interaction that's happening with a Republican that may be claiming to be liberty leaning. How would you then go about that? Right. Because a lot of people think of this kingmaker strategy as being like, we're going to support a Republican that might be liberty leaning, but let's say they start to falter. What would allow your slate and kind of your strategy to kind of knock them into check compared to one where we just give up to them?
Yeah, so a libertarian party should never endorse a candidate from another party. I just want to make that clear. Our job is to focus on our own candidates and focus on policy. When we pick policies that we're campaigning on at a given time, we're going to be evaluating how people are voting on those, and if people are voting in a way that's libertarian, we're going to call them out. I want the messaging to be focused on state level issues and things that are, it should only be focused on national issues if it's something that our Senate or congressional representatives are doing. So like Jean Shanine, Maggie Hassan, Maggie Goodlander, and Chris Pappas, those are our representatives to the federal government from New Hampshire. So ways that they're voting that's anti-liberty, we're going to highlight that.
I see.
but mostly we want to focus on in-state issues.
So
Well,
very New
So-
Hampshire centric.
Quite
And
so.
what's interesting is that you have actually, it seems like New Hampshire has been getting, in terms of its base, it's been getting bluer. Is that correct? You're having, it seems like you're actually having more blue voters.
So it's pretty interesting. We seem to always go Republican for governor, and the House, the state level House and Senate are weird. We have more reps than any other state. We have like 400 some reps, and yeah, so that tends to go red. But then in federal elections, we tend to go blue, and it's weird. The Democrats ran Joyce Craig, that was like wildly unpopular because of her time as mayor in Manchester so they ran her for governor, and that I think definitely made that election go landslide red. But there were people that went to vote for Kelly Ayotte for governor, and then clearly they voted Democrat in the federal races because we went Democrat for all the federal races.
So speaking of, I've got 270 to win up here, and I've got the history of the presidential voting records, the electoral college votes, U.S. Senate, House, and governor history. And if you go all the way back to 1792 with the first elections, there was a short period where New Hampshire was Democrat in the early mid 1800s, but then was consistently red from the 1850s all the way until the late 90s.
Yeah, if I recall correctly, New Hampshire actually is like the founding state of the Republican Party.
So it's interesting to me that the last time that New Hampshire was Republican at the state level for president, and pretty much it looks generally like the Senate's kind of in the same boat here, was before the Free State Project, because the Free State Project started in 2001, and they really they made their current push to their current version in 2005. So it looks to me like the Free State Project, which from everything I've seen has kind of claimed that it's pushing red, has actually pushed the state overwhelmingly blue for the national vote.
Yeah,
And
I don't really know why people split voting in the way that they do. The state government tends to go red, the federal elections tend to go blue.
Yeah, that is a very interesting correlation. I will grant you
it's
that.
it makes me wonder if the claim that the Free State Project in general, backing the idea of the Republicans more and wanting the Libertarian Party to kind of back Republicans more, isn't actually just damaging them. It looks from the data to me almost like the messaging from LPNH and Jeremy Kauffman and FSP has not helped the state at all. And as a matter of fact, has brought more Democrats into the state than anything else and run Republicans out.
Come to think of it, there were quite a number of like liberty-minded people who were very much deluded about Trump, about New Hampshire being a swing state, or like even worse, outright thinking it was going to be for Trump. And even just living in Concord, I could tell from like a few looks around, like, that's not going to happen. This is blue. It's going to stay blue.
Right. It's the pre-polls on likely Harris showed up exactly where it's expected. Trump lost by about 4%, a little over 3%. Sorry.
Closer than normal, but nothing to where they actually were talking about.
It's interesting because the LPNH Twitter account will often, essentially be saying things like, we want to make these people so uncomfortable that they move out of New Hampshire. And
Seems like they brought them in.
Yeah, and even then, you're going to make, the more you attack somebody, the more resilient and more obstinate they will be against it, and the more you make your ideas seem vile, and you dilute your other ones, the more people are going to fight against those, even
Again,
libertarian principles that we all agree with, right?
Yeah, that's the thing. Richard Manzo, he's in Goffstown. He's on the Goffstown Budget Committee. He was running for Hillsborough County's treasurer, and he ran as a fusion candidate and got nominated he was running as a libertarian. He won the Democrat nomination by write-in, and he was pretty much going to win it. He almost won it. And then the Democrats got this idea in their head that he was a free stater. So they sent out all these mailers about how he was an evil Republican infiltrator, even though he's just a principled libertarian and he's not even part of the FSP. He grew up here.
Yeah, I think the minute you start behaving super collectivist in general, where you're really defining people along those collectivist lines, you're going to be getting a big pushback away from the Democrats, right? When you start saying kind of crazy things about various groupings, you're going to lose all ability to kind of collaborate with them. And in this case, you're saying they kind of lost a political position, but it even more so is going to affect the things that we've, in recent years have seen been very successful. Single issue coalitions. So things like the Defend the Guard Act, that's been a single issue coalition that has gotten, some big traction. The question becomes it's not just on the right hand side of the political spectrum that these things should be happening for libertarian principles, right? They should also be happening on the left when it comes to police accountability, when it comes to, reform of how police interact with it, getting rid of victimless crimes. Like, these are things that we could easily be siding with the left with as well. But if you make the libertarian brand seem like this thing that its real principles don't actually represent, just because you're trying to push people out, then you also do that to our political possibilities as well. And not just for you guys in New Hampshire, but even more so at large. So it's been really sad to see, as somebody that's sat on the outside and has been, you've been very wary to say, like, these are the ideals I believe in, because that's what comes to their mind, is that the stuff that comes out of it.
And the funny thing about that is I've heard even people from the Mises Caucus like Dave Smith say that in interviews. On the lines of, we should be making coalitions, even with the left, on the things we agree on.
So the thing that's weird here, to like further this, is like I know that I've watched LPNH and Jeremy Kaufman's personal account talk about how, like, the state has pushed more conservative over time, and like we looked at the voting, that's just not true. And this is the transactions in New Hampshire for the government over time. So in 2008, we're looking at 5.2 billion in obligations, and then by 2024, we're looking at 16.1 billion. That 5.2, I've got an inflation calculator up, is the equivalent of about 7.7 billion. So since the Free State Project has come in, and since we have seen this push blue with this kind of consistent messaging, supposedly pushing for a more conservative and, quote, free thereby New Hampshire, we've actually seen more than a doubling in spending. And in my mind, that suggests that, the entire narrative is bullshit. And that a lot of this, a lot of the things you guys are talking about and trying to make the messaging better for libertarian principles and, monetary conservatism, and getting the government out of the way. If the government's spending money, they're in the way. Like, I think any libertarian can agree with that, right? That's the foundational principle. So shifting a little bit there, how do you see your state best served in trying to fix this? Do you see this as more of the party grows and you use your resources as a party to try to influence the government, as it were, that is already in New Hampshire? Or do you really see that LPNH has a way to really push forward candidates, and the candidates can change from the inside? What's your best idea and best plan for the future of New Hampshire as a party?
Yes. So, like I said, putting out the consistent messaging, doing a lot of outreach. We want to recruit people to run it for offices that are winnable, especially those smaller ones like budget committees, aldermen, that type of stuff. And as those people get more and more experience with name recognition and win those races, then they can run for state rep if we find that they live in a district where it seems like it's a winnable one. And just growing our candidates, growing our voter base, and meanwhile, we can work on crafting policy and policy recommendations and saying that this is what bills would make the state of New Hampshire a better place for the people that share our values, and campaign for those bills and do outreach for
By
those bills.
focusing
And
on state issues, sorry to interrupt, Rachel, we can also work to create more creative solutions that are currently not on the table. Like one of my favorite LP politicians is Larry Sharp because he's really good at coming up with creative solutions to problems that no one else really thinks about. And that is an incredibly volatile asset.
We're talking about, creative solutions and policy recommendations and in-state activism. What are some of those policy solutions and proposals that you all are thinking about?
well, I think one thing that's really important is the price of housing has skyrocketed all over the country, but in New Hampshire in particular. The Democrat solutions for these are horrible. They want rent controls, vouchers, public housing, all of this stuff that just screws up the market even further. There's a clear property rights answer to this. We need to pass zoning reform. We need people to be able to freely use their land how they wish. And we need to reform the building code laws too, so that people can build the older structures back better. And these are clear property rights issues. And we need to be messaging to the people that are concerned about this issue that more government is not the solution. What we need to do is reform these laws and make it so that the government is less in people's lives to fix this issue. That's just one example. Another big one is drug policy. We recently passed some marijuana reform, but it's horrible. The marijuana is going to be sold through the state liquor stores. So it'll be heavily taxed, heavily regulated. People will probably still jump the border to Maine and Massachusetts and Vermont to buy cheaper weed.
Yeah, so this housing question that you bring up here, it's the classic like yes in my backyard or no in my backyard issue. And you'll have Democrats that are very much like yes in my backyard because they recognize that certain growth needs to happen, and then they'll have other ones which are much more like no, not in my backyard. I don't want this big house there, right? The YIMBYs and the NIMBYs, yeah. And I had seen something from an LPNH repost where it was essentially somebody who is a quote unquote liberty leaning Republican somewhere within there that was bringing up the idea of like, we don't want this. We don't want very small properties and, huge buildings. And he basically said it would be a law that would allow favelas to be built in New Hampshire, and that you would have all these shack properties, and kind of said that he has the right to say that they can't do that. And it was a very odd thing for me to see from a liberty messaging perspective of like, you shouldn't be able to tell your neighbor what they can do with their property. If they have land and they want to build out a, multi-unit apartment building or a high rise, and that would allow cheaper, housing for people to buy apartments in, that should be like a libertarian 101, right? That if you're not for absolute property rights, like, what even are you, right? How are you even related to a libertarian?
Collectivist. That's what, Phil.
Well, yeah. I mean, it comes back to this idea of like a Hoppian, I have control over the state, or like this is my state, so I can dictate what is allowed in my covenant. And it goes against some of the most basic libertarian principles that I have of like, it's your property, you can choose what to do with it. And it was odd to see it coming from there. And I would hope that the messaging, like you said, just changing this messaging might allow for, as people get kind of crunched by the further and further inflation, maybe people wake up and be like, we need YIMBY. We need YIMBY policy that frees the people to do what they want with their property, to make housing more affordable again.
And that's the thing.
I have a really good case study for what could be done. There are companies around the country actually right now that develop 3D printed houses. It takes them about 24 hours to build. Outside of the general electric and plumbing costs about $10,000 to build. Within 24 hours, you could build multiple houses within weeks. and you would see the housing problem go down like that if we just create an environment strong enough for that kind of innovation.
Do the regulations currently on the books allow for that? Because the first thing that comes to my mind when I think of building houses is permits. What is it like in New Hampshire?
It vastly varies by town. Out in Grafton, you can do whatever you want, but you're going to be 2 hours away from civilization. And yeah, so and this is a purpose that I think the Libertarian Party could absolutely serve, is running people for zoning board and aldermen and all these other things that affect how, like, land use policy by town. We have a ton of really small districts, like hundreds of towns. So there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like something that you could definitely partner with different political parties to get these across. And especially if you run in there, it gives a place for if you're in one of these zoning committees or something like that, where libertarian ideas are then getting shared among people that might not be, or have some aversion to it. And maybe you could help change that branding of, like, the craziness that is coming out of that official Twitter to much more of like, hey, these people actually care about wanting housing to be cheaper for people. They actually do want a better economy for everybody. They just think that there's a different way to do this. And maybe they might be right, because what we've been trying has been failing. And I would hope that would be the message that Democrats or Republicans would learn from that. Right.
Yeah. And the thing is, if people are really set on the Free State Project strategy, if you want people to move here, they have to be able to afford housing here. And if you want them to set up businesses here, they need to be able to afford to do something other than pay rent. So getting the housing crisis under control by having these reforms so that new buildings can be built allows for more people to come here.
I mean, especially povertarians, right? There's a lot of libertarians that completely check out of the society and say, I'm not paying taxes on anything. And they, yeah. So, like, for them, to be able to say, hey, I can actually be closer to a city and still have this cheap housing. And that way I can get involved in these economies and build them out. I think that would be good for anybody that wants to see a freer, even more of a libertarian move there. And then I think you would inspire a lot of people that might have been kept away to come there. Whatever people think of Karen Ann, I had heard her speak once about, like, she had been contemplating moving to New Hampshire, but kind of from some of the toxic culture I have gleaned, maybe I incorrectly gleaned this from her statements, but it seemed like some of that culture that you've seen from the LPNH party itself is what's kept her from moving there. And so for people that are kind of on that edge, they might go, well, if I could move there cheaply and then I could shift the culture within the party there, maybe that becomes a way also we could make a more libertarian party inside of New Hampshire.
Well, just the other day, I made a Facebook post that was telling people that it was just FSP propaganda. And half of my comments are like, I'd like to, but the people up there are awful, because the only exposure they've had to people up there is...
Funnily enough, one of the people cited was Kaufman.
So I'm a data guy at heart. I'm an engineer as my background. So as soon as it was like, well, the prices are expensive in New Hampshire, it's like, well, how bad is the housing density, et cetera, in New Hampshire? So New Hampshire is the 9th most expensive state to get a house in. For a normal sized house. And every one of the ones above it, and I say state, that includes DC as one of them. Like Hawaii obviously is more expensive. You have to ship things over the ocean. California is more expensive because their government's terrible, etc. And I was like, okay, well, maybe New Hampshire is really high density, right? Population density. It's not. It's bog standard. It's right in the middle. It's mid-20s.
And we have a lot of, really the most populated areas are Manchester, which is like the most southernmost city, and pretty much, like, I want to say an hour, 45 minutes away from Boston, barring traffic, and Concord, where I live. Everywhere else, few and far between.
It is too sparse for me. Like that, I at one point was looking, just fantasizing about maybe moving to New Hampshire, and I was looking at it as there are not enough cities, so it's very, very sparse. In my book,
it's it's significantly less dense than Georgia, and I don't think most people consider Georgia like a densely populated state, right?
I mean, outside of Atlanta, not really.
Yeah, right.
I mean, to put this in perspective,
I've driven
I'm originally from
through.
Ohio. Like, remember hearing about Springfield in the news?
Mhm.
I grew up 20 minutes east of that, and both my mother and my oldest sister work as special ed teachers in Springfield. Springfield is bigger than Manchester by a slight margin.
Ohio is almost twice the density of New Hampshire. I've just got the whole list up here, so it was easy check.
And yet, cost of living is absurdly high in relative terms for that.
Right. And so, like, basically what I'm saying is, like, I wasn't sure we were going to touch on this ever. I didn't have this prepared beforehand, but just doing a quick spot check in the numbers, Rachel's spot on. It looks like New Hampshire just needs to build houses. And everyone knows the reason we can't build houses, the government says no, right? So it seems very much like you guys have your head screwed on to me.
Well, it seems like that, kind of gives all the more reason for kind of a real libertarian takeover of a local city government to where they could change directly any sort of those guidelines when it comes to building houses, and then kind of just do it like most libertarians imagine. We try things out. We see how the market responds. And I imagine that you would see a rapid increase in the entire economy if you just started making very cheap, affordable housing in a beautiful area inside of New Hampshire. And you basically had everyone be free there and uncoerced in their local government, and see kind of just what happens. So if anything, it gives them more of the reason, because of that sparsity, that you could find kind of a small to medium-sized little city or town and really try to be influential in that politics there to make that happen. It seems like that is an attainable goal, and one that if people were kind of excited to come there and not feel like it might be a negative attachment to their name, that you would have many, many more libertarians coming to New Hampshire to be able to affect that.
Absolutely. In turn, that makes it freer New Hampshire, which in turn means greater prosperity, brings more libertarians in, brings the New Hampshire into a nice and wonderful cycle. But right now, something's in the way.
Yeah, there's definitely some negative feedback in that feedback cycle for sure. I know I wouldn't want to come there, right? Because I want to still be associated with trying to make the Libertarian Party better. And if I go there and those people are still in there, then I couldn't go anywhere and kind of be associated with it because it would just look so poorly. Right now, when I bring up that I am, libertarian or libertarian leaning in general, I have to then qualify it if they bring it up and say, whoa, those are not people that represent me. And I wouldn't want my entire existence to be that, especially if I became a member, right? Like if I gave money to that, that would look very bad for me. And I wouldn't want to give money to that in the first place. So I think that is kind of definitely what would be keeping a lot of libertarians from moving from New Hampshire in general.
Yeah, I like to think my character kind of avoids that problem that you described, but I wouldn't be surprised if I told people I was libertarian if that was how they would think of me immediately thereafter.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to be defending those kind of tweets, right? Like it's not something libertarians should have to be doing.
Well, we've talked about this before, that libertarianism is radical enough and it's edgy enough. And I think maybe the thinking behind LPNH is, okay, we're going to grab people's attention by saying these crazy, edgy things. And the fact is, libertarianism is edgy enough to grab people's attention anyhow. You are diluting the message if you choose to almost capitulate on the actual policy positions and the cultural positions in just to say edgy things. You're losing the actual message of libertarianism. Again, just so that you can posture online to people in your little social club.
And when he gets inevitable backlash for it, the default strategy has always been a bit of a Mott and Bailey, where he'll say something that, at least to libertarians, is fairly uncontroversial, and then he'll somehow tangentially connect it to something that he just said that was absolutely ridiculous, purely edgelord nonsense.
It's and that one to me, like we've got case studies on this. We've seen businesses try the strategy of being insane or attacking people, like the Wendy's Twitter. Like everyone loves the Wendy's Twitter, and it's mean to people sometimes. It's super snarky. It did nothing for their sales. It didn't help them at all. They actually lost money.
I should know. I worked at a Wendy's as my first big boy job,
Did
and
Steve
yeah,
McKayla manage it?
it was because people who acted like the Wendy's Twitter account is why their sales have been plummeting at the franchise I worked at.
Yes, kind of a culture of not positivity and not a positive vision for the future. There's no wonder that people aren't, super excited to get involved and do outreach, right? Because what are you gonna be promoting if that's kind of the brand that you're trying to present?
As an aside, Amanda brought it up. I think it's an important point here, Adam. Did Stephen Nikela manage it? The new chair of the National Party.
He manages Wendy's franchises, so I was just curious if he managed your franchise as
He
well.
manages all the Wendy's and Dairy Queen and a few other restaurants in Key West.
Yeah.
So yeah, an LPNH is the reason he does not have a Wendy's in New Hampshire. He told me it secretly. This is information you guys don't need to know. But he told me, he's like, I would have 5 Wendy's in New Hampshire, but goddamn Kaufman is the reason why you don't have a Frosty and you have a broken McFlurry machine at your McDonald's.
My first job was a Wendy's, and they tried to make me a manager, and I said, no, you don't pay enough for me to manage this place.
So you're saying that Stephen Nikela makes poor financial decisions by agreeing to manage Wendy's as well?
He makes more money owning the franchise in the party city of Florida than I would have made being an assistant manager.
It's looking through the comments on your Choose Liberty Move to New Hampshire post that you brought up earlier. I got it up on my Facebook on this side, and the only reason I'm not going to share the screen directly is I don't want to dox anybody's even their name for who's talking to Rachel. There's a bunch of comments here that specifically call out effectively Kaufman, where it's calling out the cultist around him. This one's probably my favorite. My wife would agree. Sorry, it's too cold, and the LP affiliate sucks. Y'all got Kaufman, and that's like cockroaches. It's just this. I don't want to buy alcohol from the state. That's a thing that seems like an easy win, right? Like I can't imagine that many politicians just like, alcohol must be bought from the state. That seems like something that the Libertarian Party could get together on. So I guess that's the thing. Are you going to end the alcohol sales from the state? Can that be my reason to come to New Hampshire?
If we can, that would be great.
No, in Pennsylvania we have the same thing. We have state stores in PA, and it's we had to fight for a lot of changes, and usually it was by businesses that were doing it. And so if you can activate the business to really get involved in that lobbying, it's one way you can take advantage of it. And so we had a bunch of restrictions even on wineries and stuff in Pennsylvania. And then the different wineries came together and was like, we want to turn this into like kind of a vineyard region of Pennsylvania. And then they lobbied the government to make it so that way they would get an exception. And it was very positive to business. And so it's like we should be rolling these victories and say, why is this not being done for other forms of alcohol, other forms of things that the government tries to control? And so like Kyle was saying, that it absolutely should be something that could be rolled into more wins up in New Hampshire.
Absolutely. And you'd be amazed how many Prohibition era regulations on alcohol are still in the books. Like a big one that comes to mind for me is a lot of bars up here are required to serve food during certain hours alongside alcohol under that, which I obviously can't complain because, I've definitely reaped the benefits of that. But at the same time, I shouldn't be benefit on that because they were not feeding the food voluntarily. They were being coerced into it by the state.
And then it's usually like really, really gross pizza. Anytime it's like you're forced to have food, it's like some microwave pizza that's terrible. And so then you're really just there for the beer, and then you have this like awful
bars
pizza.
Food is perfectly serviceable for when you go there and watch football.
For when you're drunk, it's fine, I'm sure. So we talked about building 3D houses, which is incredibly rad. What are some other single issue coalition type things, type of changes that you think would be important when you're with LPNH? What are some single coalition or single issue coalitions that you're thinking of forming?
Yeah, like I was saying, the housing stuff is really important. Drug freedom. I want to get better versions of the marijuana law that passed. Um, Mushrooms are going to be a huge industry. Tons of studies are showing that they have a lot of therapeutic benefits. I want our state to be ahead of that fight. Colorado and Oregon are the ones leading it right now. But why shouldn't the Beacon of Liberty, New Hampshire, be ahead of the fight on mushrooms and other psychedelic therapies? We've got tons of pretty woods that people could come trip in for therapy.
No,
And
and right now, the mental health crisis in the United States is like very clear that people want to try other methods. So you see ketamine therapy kind of growing. I think MDMA therapy for people with PTSD is likely to become a big thing. And psilocybin, both in high dose experiences, but also low dose, seems to be having positive effects. And so that would ease. I would imagine that there's Democrats that would be very willing to do that, especially as people are kind of believing more in like the RFK style version of this, and he seems to be very much against traditional pharmaceuticals. I don't think they should be banned, but I think people should have more options, right? And so that might be a way that you could form a single issue coalition there. And so that would be really awesome to see if you guys could get that kind of rolling. I do worry that some of the right-leaning libertarians, with their idea of kind of the correct conservative culture of being the only thing, might restrict some of that. And especially for the liberty-leaning Republicans, I think some of them are not necessarily the Ron Paul types who basically say, we don't need government to tell you not to do heroin, in that famous speech that he gave on the stage when questioned, well, you don't want to legalize everything, right? You only want to legalize marijuana. And he said flat out, no, we want to legalize heroin. What do you need the government to tell you what you're not going to do heroin? And I don't think there's very many of those, even in the liberty-leaning Republicans, that are willing to say that. And so I do worry that you will have some pushback against these people that are supposed to be kind of the harbingers of the liberty message with the current strategy. I don't know if they're necessarily going to be evoking that sort of issue coalition that as a party we should really be doing.
Yeah, it's a little undeniable, and that's true with a lot of even more lightly liberty-minded candidates. Like, this is not a great example, but last year at my law school, Governor Sununu came to visit, and they were asking questions about even some very libertarian topics like the legalization of marijuana, and he was literally making talking points that you would hear Republicans say in the 2000s about how they're a gateway drug or about how they cause all these health issues, which is like, not only is that factually not true, I can make an easy case for you right now that something tells me you would not be able to justify if I were to bring up. And that should be where the focal point with libertarians in particular being, when it comes to drug policy, is forcing these outdated concepts and argument points and just destroy them.
Yeah. Especially if there's a case, if there's an area where Democrats know they're not going to win, but if they did a sort of formation with the Liberty candidate there, that process might win out over kind of a more no marijuana legalization Republican, you might be able to win a Liberty seat in higher office within the state by having that kind of coalition, especially if Democrats in the region know they're not going to win. So yeah, I think there's plenty of opportunities where if the LPNH really focused on liberty-minded candidates, some real good positive things could happen.
So Joe Hanoush from Florida has a question for you guys. Wait, y'all have to buy alcohol from the government? Were they closed when the government shut down or on holidays?
In PA, for a while there, I think we were closed on Sundays too, like the state stores. So yes, it would be. It was a very difficult. I can't remember how long ago it was that they switched it over to now you can go on Sundays, but it's like a very strict time limit. If you want anything, and for a while you couldn't even go to like a grocery store and get it. Now they have like a wine and beer in grocery stores. I don't know what New Hampshire's like. Is it like the same sort of thing there?
I do not drink much, so I can't tell you that much about when I think they
I
closed
live
fairly
near one of the
early.
wine and
So
beer.
in Florida, I think the liquor stores, depending on the county, have different regulations on when they close. But I know, like, you could buy alcohol way late at night in Florida. You could buy it until like 2 a.m. in Jacksonville, whereas in Virginia, which has way more alcohol regulations, cut off is at midnight. and all the state-run stores close at like 8 or something.
Yes. Yeah.
So yeah, I don't
I'm
really
not much of a drinker, and normally when I do, it's very like basic stuff like Corona. So normally I just get that from like the grocery store. But whenever I do go to those places, generally speaking, they're not doing groceries. It's pretty much just alcohols and hard liquor. I think my birthday, I went there and got like green apple vodka, Smirnoff vodka, because I am just weird in my alcohol taste.
It's just if the government can monopolize supposed immorality, then they will. They'll get gambling, liquor. They'll do all that. That's fine.
Oh yeah, like there was a casino that's actually right next to the draft bar in Concord that got revoked for some licensing issues. Apparently, it was during COVID, and it was kind of leeching off the system. So can't have too much sympathy. But at the same time, if those systems in place didn't exist that he could rig, he'd still be operating, and he probably wouldn't have needed them in the first place.
Yeah, I know. I gambled my entire stimulus check, so like for sure they would have made a lot of money. And I know there'd be plenty of others that did the same.
I mean, I did.
Well,
I
we may be
technically
getting
gambled with
another
crypto,
stimmy.
So that's not until what, 26? No.
Well,
let's just give everyone $5,000. Let's
yeah.
you get a Tesla, and our money will be worth
Everybody
nothing.
get a Tesla and
Inflation stimulus checks, ladies and gentlemen, to help with inflation. You're going to get an inflation stimulus check.
Musk is talking about giving every person in the country $5,000 because of all the Doge cuts.
But we're still going to be running a debt. We'll
just giving the money away, though, is it?
Well, we still be running a deficit. So in reality, it's not just giving away money we've saved; it's printing more money to give money to people. It's like the worst version of handouts possible.
It's paying yourself from your own credit card and bragging about having more money.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially a Ponzi scheme, right? It's like we saved all this money, so now we can give you money as profits. It's like, well, no, you actually just borrowed that money from somebody else to give to the people. And in reality, they're borrowing from all of us and giving to quote unquote all of us. It is a backwards thing, and anybody claiming that this is good economically just does not understand Austrian economics at all. And I would hope every single libertarian would go, something's up here. Maybe this was a bad idea. Maybe these is going to be the harbingers of like UBI. You know,
those efficiency cuts would have been put towards the debt.
yeah,
Actually,
I agree.
I have a fun little quote on that subject about libertarians and buyer's remorse.
Oh, no.
Something that we found from the LPNH a little recently was, despite their endorsement of Donald Trump back in last 2024, on February 4th, in response to Trump wanting to take ownership of the Gaza Strip, they said, and I quote, "No one should be surprised when a socialist like Donald Trump turned to violence in order to gain more power."
Hey, it's an interesting comparison to their prior advertisements for the Trump administration. It's I think this is the biggest.
They elected a socialist.
My friend Kevin Kahn had a very funny reply because the LPNH posted this thing that was like some stone toss meme or whatever, asking if Trump has an APAC handler. And Kevin Kahn replied, and he was like, "Shouldn't you guys have found that out before you endorsed him?"
Yeah, it's definitely interesting to see people kind of put on these rose-colored glasses for like the quote-unquote good things that he's done, and then like completely whitewash like the absolutely horrible things, and like add up that the scale was somehow worth risking our brand as a party on. I don't know how people made that metric, but personally,
short-term gains.
And I don't see them really even as gains. I think most of it is just a performance, right? It's a performance to get more people to accept a more efficient but overarching state intrusion into your life. And now you have people on the right kind of cheering it on without even realizing that that's what's happening.
Welcome to duopolistic political theater.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate that a party that was designed to basically be a consistent fuck you to the duopoly was so easily bought into supporting them.
Went from "don't tread on me" to "oh, tread on me harder, daddy."
Yeah.
The thing is, when you have populists on both the conservative and progressive side, as you do, there is not ideology. And so I even misuse the term conservative and progressive, because there's not ideology, there's rhetoric, and there's rhetoric that appeals to sentiment, and it masquerades as ideology. At best, it's policy preference, and that shifts. And so one of the key roles that the Libertarian Party has to play is to be that ideological anchor that our major parties have never been able to be, because of the need to engage in compromise and appeal to different swaths of the electorate and go through realignments. Our virtue almost is that we don't win so much. So we don't have to make those trade-offs at the national level. Instead, we're that anchor. We're saying, all right, here's what self-ownership looks like. Here's what individualism looks like. And that can change. That can be more fungible on policy while the principle is consistent. And so it baffles me that you have Libertarian Party leadership who fail to see that and will just acquiesce to whatever populist rhetoric at the expense of being that anchor, which is the real source of power in our country, in a political movement.
You're absolutely right, Amanda. And there was something that I remember at some point, like 22, 23, someone in the Mises Caucus, or people pushing into that, like more into the leadership of the LP, said that libertarians were addicted to losing. I think it's different. It's not that we're addicted to losing. It's that we recognize that we can lose and still have the strength to fight on. And that,
win.
Any political movement is a very powerful thing, because every movement has their moment and it fades away. But the ones that will persist and win are the ones who have the strength to carry on even when they consistently lose again and again and again.
Well, and again, loss and victory, to define it only in electoral terms is myopic anyhow. Libertarian wins are oftentimes scored as a result of not winning an electoral seat. They're won through other means. And it is ridiculous to accuse libertarians of being addicted to losing when someone's own strategy was literally agreeing to lose. That was the Kingmaker strategy. We will lose. So that nothing screams addicted to losing like that. And we also, in the same process,
and then they call it allergic to relevance, when frankly I'd say they're allergic to reality.
Irrelevance. Folding oneself into a major political party screams irrelevance to me.
Yeah, I think you're right, though. It's not that it's like you might have an electoral loss, but every time you do that and every time you force a runoff, you demand that people look at our ideas, right? And it's not just this person was this problem. It's that the ideas were enough to pull enough that you did not earn those voters. And I know a lot of people hate Sarwark and anything, but he had a sentiment of like, your parties will die if they don't listen to our ideas. And we don't care if we cause you to lose. Like, that process in and of itself is a winning mentality. And if we give that up, that we essentially have given up everything that we have had, right? Is that process of literally saying no to your system, no to your candidates. I will not sign my name next to somebody who will drop bombs and ethnically cleanse the city, right? And unless you guys start choosing not to do that, you will never get the votes from people that believe with us. And eventually, I think you're seeing currently that it's a much more popular idea now to be very against war, right? Like, we were ahead of the curve on this for decades, right? And if we had better outreach and better branding, these people would have been engaged with our other ideas. And they go, well, they were right on the war part. Maybe they're right on the economics part too, right? And actually, they're pretty accepting of people. They don't really care about what people do in their personal life. Like, the fact that you can combine all of those together means that if we had a party that was actually functional and not embarrassing, as the chair had claimed that she was going to provide, but did the exact opposite, that we might be reaching these people now at this moment in history, instead of trying to figure out how we're going to keep the party on life support, right?
And to kind of tie the theme rather neatly, I have this beautiful quote from Calvin Coolidge. Nothing in this world can replace persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan, pressed on, has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race.
All right.
That's an amazing one to close on. We want to start a tradition. Then thank you, Adam and Rachel, both so much for coming on. We're trying to start a tradition where we close with some fun libertarian questions. I don't know if we want to do a popcorn round or what, but one thing that popped into my mind is, what is one book by a non-libertarian author that libertarians should read?
I had a very interesting economics professor in college, and unfortunately, a lot of his books are out of print. Well, he was really good at teaching economic reasoning, and I would recommend from Harold Winter, Trade-Offs, if you can find it.
Very
His
nice.
basic philosophy when it comes to it is, what's better? Define better. What is your personal goals? And I think when you do that, you're going to find that a lot of his economic reasoning makes really good libertarian arguments as well. Like, oh, there's no benefit to smoking? Really? How can people smoke then? Because they enjoy it? See? That's a benefit.
And on that note, kids, smoking is cool. Rachel, you're holding up the Montessori method.
I'm expecting
yeah.
Amanda to show up in a leather jacket next week. And
I will be. I'll be puffing, a Lucky Strikes. Go on.
Excellent.
So Maria Montessori developed a learning method that's been studied for 100 years. It's highly effective, and it's based on individualism and freedom. And yes, I think that everyone should read this because it's the answer to everything that's wrong with our current public school system.
I am the product of Montessori school when I was 3, 4, or 5 years old, and it was maybe the best thing my parents ever did for me. So Montessori method is absolutely amazing. It's an excellent choice.
It worked for my wife too, and she's smarter than I am. So,
But that's just because you got a dumb man brain, right? It's like that's the reality of it.
Why do you think I always
like-
let Rachel talk first during this event? Because there's more to it than that. She's actually a significantly better activist than me, and frankly, one of the best I've seen.
Well, that is a ringing endorsement, and I think I like the idea of this end topic of finding out a book, and maybe next time the host will share a book option as well.
Oh, maybe we won't. Also, maybe that's also fun.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you again for coming, and we will do everything we can in the process to helping your guys' slate, and any way that we can do that. You guys let us know. All right.
Thanks for having us. I can't speak for Rachel, but I will gladly like to come back anytime you want.
We'd love to have you.
Thank you, Adam.
Sounds
All right,
great.
guys.
Catch you guys soon.
Have a great night.
Y'all have a good
A
night.
bientôt.
Right now. I am impractical. I am radical. Don't know about our funds, but I know we're indebted. Don't want to employ Austin Paget or skill. The LP Anarchy. No directly. Anarchy for the LP. We don't got a chair or a VC. They didn't assign our convention in time, and our dues money is a laundering scheme. Now I wanna see anarchy in the LP. We trade being based to start chilling for Trump. Nothing to invest. We got even less seed already guaranteed. Marsyros would be freed. Now we're gonna say anarchy. Will you stop the LMC? Is this Team Kennedy, or is this the GOP, or is this the DNC? I thought it was the LP, or just another party. Another ex-con vacancy? We're gonna say anarchy. And we're gonna say anarchy. We're gonna say anarchy. And we're gonna say anarchy. Full transparency. Now I wanna say anarchists on the business list.